Imagine that you can give the elevator speech to our reader. What do you tell to them?
I tell them that I'm a fourth generation Coloradoan. And the reason that I run for office is because I think we need to get back to putting Americans first. We need to go fight for our country, essentially. I have 6 grandsons. They're the 6th generation to live in Weld County. And it's important to me that I work to make sure that they have a country where they feel that they have the land of opportunity and their freedoms are intact and they have the ability to go out and prosper in this country. And I'm fearful for where we're headed right now. It's just not, I just don't think it's the place that we need to be, and I don't think it's good for, essentially I feel like we're starting to bankrupt our country, and I don't want to leave that for my grandchildren or anyone's grandchildren.
But you have a career
Yes, sir.
as an elected official. Tell us about that. Why do you decide to go to the public service?
Sure. So I grew up on a dairy farm, owned a dairy farm for several years here in Weld County.
In which area?
In the southwest part of Weld County,
Okay.
Southwest Weld. Owned a dairy farm, owned some other farming operations. At the same time, I was running a small business with my sister in Fort Collins. We had a floral shop, so I have a small business background as well. And I was starting to raise a family. So I was doing all of those things at the same time. Minding my own business, getting stuff done, raising a family, just like everybody else. At one point, there was a lot of municipal solid waste, landfills, and other type of waste facilities that were looking to be sited in my area. So I started working with my community, and believe it or not, I became like a community activist, right? And it was really about how do I protect my community? How do I go fight for my community? Because I never thought I would run for county commissioner, but what happened was my county commissioner at the time told me I was just chasing windmills. And I told him he was going to be very sorry when I caught one. So I ran against him for county commissioner and I won, and that was back in the 90s. So I have served as a county commissioner. I ran 2 terms during the 90s, honored my term limits, went and worked for Governor Bill Owens, eventually becoming the executive director of the Department of Local Affairs. And then when that appointment was up, when Governor Ritter took office, I no longer had a job, so I came back to being a county commissioner because I love my county, I love the state, and I love feeling that I'm engaged and I can help people out in my area, right? And so that's why I run. But so I've been, again, a small business owner, a dairy farmer, I've been a county commissioner, and then a couple of years ago, I was going to retire and go bug those 6 grandkids of mine, but then Jared Polis happened. And he started attacking and going after, essentially, Weld County, oil and gas, and agriculture. So the 8th Congressional District sits right on top of the Wattenberg Field, which is extremely important with regard to oil and gas production in this state and in this nation. It also sits right on top of, encompasses some of the most prime irrigated farmland in the state, not to mention a $2 to $3 billion agricultural industry. So I think, with my background in agriculture, I think I'm very uniquely situated to serve this district. But then on top of that all, I led the fight with regard to keeping those jobs in oil and gas. Those jobs that are so important to everyone who's living in northern Colorado, in Adams County and Weld County. There was like 250,000 jobs associated with oil and gas. Most of those were in Weld County or associated in Weld County. And they were people like, you and me, right? That had these great paying jobs, was working really hard so that they could, make sure and be able to take their kids to the doctor so that maybe both parents didn't have to work and, so then parents could stay home and take care of their children and raise their family kind of thing. And when Polis went after them with the legislators down at the Capitol in Senate Bill 181, I was the one who led the fight against that legislation. And it'd been years that I'd been defending oil and gas and those oil and gas jobs that are just so extremely important to this district. And, and it's the jobs that are even related to that. So I led the fight on that. And, in Weld County, we did pretty well and we were able to work with the industry and make sure that they can still get oil and gas wells permitted and still try to do some production here and exploration here in the state. But our state has just really gone after oil and gas, and then they go after agriculture at the same time. So those are two areas that I fight for, two areas that I feel that I'm uniquely qualified and have a lot of experience in. And so that's part of the reason why I'm running.
Imagine that you are in Congress in April 2023, and then this is your first intervention presenting your district.
Yeah,
What do you say in the Chamber of or the House of Representatives for the first time presenting your district? It is April 2023, and then it will be the first time that you talk about your district. How do you present the District 8?
I say to them, when I'm presenting for the first time, I remind them where we're at with regard to inflation, how we are at a 40-year high when it comes to inflation in our country, how our debt has increased to $30 trillion. That's $90,000 for every man, woman, and child living in America. I tell them how we used to be energy independent and now we're energy dependent. I'm going to talk to them about how important my district is to ensuring that we are energy independent again, that we can get to that place, and that it's about how do we bring jobs back to not just CD8, not just Colorado, but back to our nation. I'm going to talk to them about how I believe we need to secure our borders, because if we don't have a secure border, we don't have a country. I'm going to talk to them about how important agriculture is, not just to my district, not just to this state, but also to this nation, and how this area, in my district, is basically 7th in the nation as far as agricultural production, and how it's important that we really look at ensuring that those jobs are there instead of putting up barriers to those jobs. You know, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's in oil and gas, or whether it's in any type of business, and that we need to start reducing regulation and eliminating regulation and barriers to people getting good jobs. I'm also going to talk to them about education, because I'm currently serving as a state senator, but in my district, I've heard from the people. And education is extremely important to them, and an opportunity for their children to have the best education they can have so that they can be prosperous, so that they know how to read, so that they can engage in their community when they become productive adults. I'm going to talk to them about how important that is, and that it's just not good when we have an administration that sends out the message to parents that wish to be engaged in their children's education, that want to know what's going on, that we have an administration that calls them domestic terrorists. I'm going to tell them how I'm not in support of that, because I've talked to people in my district and they want to be engaged, fully engaged in their children's education, as they should be. I'm going to talk to them about how we need to be working as a country to allow parents to make that decision as to what is the best educational opportunity for their children, because that's what I hear from my district. But I'm going to talk about my district in a way that says, you know, this is a district that truly feeds the world and fuels the world. And we've got to get back to where we have jobs, good jobs, that my district, the people who live in my district, can go out and get, so that they have every opportunity possible in this great land of ours.
Your final remark is basic stuff that you want the Republican, not the general readers, but the Republican voters.
Again, it's extremely important for me that as we go through this race and as we talk about what we're going to do, that we talk about putting Americans first and working to essentially give Nancy Pelosi, let's make sure she gets a new job, right? She doesn't need to be where she's at, because it is about America. But it's also about, as you go through this, folks need to understand that we're in an interview process here as we run for this office, you know, all of us. And while, you know, my opponents that are running in the primary, they are conservative and they talk about being conservative fighters, I want folks to know that I'm a conservative fighter who's actually won, who's done the job and has a proven track record. So as a county commissioner, I led my county to zero debt. And on top of that, reduced the mill levy. So in other words, worked on those property taxes, and instead of us collecting all these property taxes in, we reduced that and eliminated it to the tune of $350 million. We are zero debt county. We have a contingency fund balance of over $200 million when I left the county. And so, you know, that's my track record. I led the county to that. You know, it started back in the 90s when I was first a county commissioner, and in the 2000s, 2020 when I went off the board, that's where we were at. As a county commissioner, as a person truly engaged in our community, when the state started going after agriculture, when the state started going after state legislature and the governor started going after oil and gas, I was the person who led the fight and defended those oil and gas jobs. None of my opponents were at the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission with me. None of my opponents were at the EPA hearings that I was at, you know, fighting for and speaking on behalf of the people who work in the oil and gas industry. Also, the other place where I've done really well for this community and for my state is with regard to transportation. So in 2013, the state of Colorado told me in a meeting that we would never have any improvements on I-25 North, which is, you know, Main Street, Colorado here, that we would never have improvements on I-25 North unless we were willing to tax an existing lane, a lane that we'd already paid for on I-25.
One pay lane.
Yes, it's called a general purpose lane. So if we didn't put a tax on an existing lane, they weren't going to do any improvements on I-25. I told them that's not acceptable. I went out, started a coalition of municipal and county leaders, of business leaders, went after funding, went and argued in front of the Transportation Commission to get our fair share of funding. And now, 8 years later, $1.2 billion worth of improvements on I-25 North. So that's what I mean by we need to hire people who know how to get the job done, and that would be me. I've gotten the job done. I'm not just a conservative, I'm not just a conservative fighter, but I'm a conservative fighter who puts wins on the board and knows how to do the job and has a proven track record. And furthermore, as a state senator, even though I'm in the minority, it still doesn't stop me from introducing bills that are important for the state of Colorado and important for my constituents. And one of the bills that I've introduced is to ensure that we fully fund education, that we truly look at funding for those teachers that are highly effective teachers and that deserve to have a pay raise. And at the same time, this bill also says we're going to create what we call the Hope Scholarship Grant, which would allow parents to receive money to look at where do their children need further educational opportunities. And so those are areas that I continue to fight for. I continue to fight for more funding for education and have won in those areas. And the other thing is when the state came after law enforcement, you know, it's one thing to say, oh yes, I'm going to defend and I'm going to stand up and back up law enforcement. It's another thing, like for me, example, I came back to my board of county commissioners and said, look, they're going after our sheriff's deputies. You know, these are the guys that go and fight for us every day, that go out, you know, put their lives on the line every day for us, essentially, never knowing if they're going to be home that night kind of thing. Their families don't know. We need to go in and come back and fund more liability for them because that's where they were getting attacked, so that they can feel safe and secure in their job, knowing that when they go out the door to protect and serve, that we've got their backs, and that if something should happen, they don't have to worry about losing their home or losing their job, that we've got their backs. And when this state went after the Second Amendment and passed the red flag bill, I was the county commissioner who worked with my sheriff and made Weld County a Second Amendment sanctuary county and passed that resolution, which said, you know what, this is unconstitutional. We're not going to enforce this law because we believe it's unconstitutional, and we're going to work with our sheriff. So those are things where it's a point of action. You know, talk is cheap. Everybody can talk it. Everybody can say what they're going to do. I've done it. That's what I would say to folks.